Hello, everyone. My name is Annie Rogers, and on behalf of the ADDitude team, I am pleased to welcome you to today's ADHD Experts presentation titled Eating with ADHD, Improving Your Relationship with Food. Leading today's presentation is Nicole DeMasi Malcher. Nicole is a registered dietitian and a certified diabetes care and education specialist with a master's degree in nutrition and food science. After a late ADHD diagnosis, she has dedicated her career to helping adults with ADHD heal their relationship with food and body image through intuitive eating and weight-inclusive care. Nicole is also the founder of Eating with ADHD, the online course, coaching program, and community. You can learn more about Nicole and her services by visiting www.eatingwithadhd.com. We would like to begin today's webinar by asking a poll question to our live audience. Which of the following challenges related to eating and nutrition cause you the most stress and frustration? Please select up to 3 answer choices and comment in the text box under the video player to tell us more. This will help us in the Q&A at the end of today's presentation. And for answers to common webinar questions about slides, transcripts, and certificates of attendance, click on the FAQ tab of your webinar screen. For reading to supplement today's webinar, check out The Oi of Cooking on page 58 of ADDitude Magazine's Spring 2025 issue. It contains some ADHD-friendly tips for grocery shopping and meal prep. And I also recommend an article on page 56 that explains how you can use AI to assist you with meal planning, among other everyday tasks. If you're not yet a subscriber to ADDitude Magazine, webinar participants can get a 15% discount plus a free copy of the ADDitude ebook, How the ADHD Brain Works, by signing up now. You can click that link on your screen to get 15% off ADDitude. Finally, the sponsor of today's webinar is Inflow. Are you struggling with eating habits and ADHD? You're not alone, and Inflow is here to help. Developed by leading ADHD experts, their science-backed self-help program offers proven strategies to help you build a healthier relationship with food, manage impulsive eating, and create sustainable habits. Click the link on your screen to take Inflow's free ADHD traits quiz to get started. ADDitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. So without any further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome Nicole. Thank you so much for joining us today and for leading this discussion on eating with ADHD.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm a huge fan of ADDitude, so I'm very excited to be here today. So I'm just going to jump right into it. Here's what you'll all learn today. We're going to learn how ADHD affects eating habits and increases the risk of disordered eating, why restrictive diets are harmful for mental and physical health, how intuitive eating can help people with ADHD improve their relationship with food, prevent binge eating, and reduce overwhelm. And then we'll identify some key steps to start improving your eating habits and nourishing your brain without restriction. I'll give you guys some tips and some ways to get started at the end. So why is ADHD so challenging? There's lots of reasons. I'm going to name the most common reasons. The first one we can think of as executive dysfunction, right? That's, as a review, that's the task initiation, flexible thinking, time blindness, poor working memory, the things that make us struggle with planning, prioritizing, organizing. So think, struggling with meal planning and shopping and cooking and all of the steps that go along with it. We can have a lot of challenges and with overwhelm around eating, forgetting to eat, right? There's the time blindness. We might get hyper-focused and completely lose track of time. meal planning difficulties, analysis paralysis with food choices is also a big one that we see. And then there's dopamine dysregulation. So a lot of people I work with complain of using food for stimulation. Like there's just this constant food noise, and they are constantly looking for food. I had struggled with that myself when I first got diagnosed with ADHD as well. Constantly, getting up to go to the refrigerator, looking for some snacks because you just feel this restlessness and you need some dopamine. So looking for food. And typically we crave things that will hit the spot, right? So there's the sweet, salty, crunchy, spicy, and bubbly options. Impulsivity is another one. So sort of looking for that quick fix rather than thinking about the long-term effects and how it's going to make us feel. This is especially true when we are overly hungry or we have no plan. We're more likely to be impulsive. Then there's poor interoceptive awareness. This is the body's sort of eighth sense. It's the ability to feel what's happening inside the body, like things like hunger cues and fullness cues, thirst, that type of thing. We have a lack of this, so we're not really able to feel what's going on or recognize them until we feel really ravenous and it's too late. And then we end up making a more impulsive choice. This can also be enhanced by ADHD meds like stimulants, or if you have a history of trauma and you're sort of dissociated or you don't really feel what's happening in your body. Some other challenges include distraction. We know that we're typically distracted overall. This can cause dissatisfaction or not really paying attention to what you're eating. Emotional dysregulation. So that this can be a good self-coping tool, and it is normal to use food to cope actually in a normal world. But if it's the only tool, that's when it can become an issue. And this is, what is otherwise known as emotional eating. Then there's all or nothing thinking. So sometimes we often need to do something a certain way, right? We're either on the diet or we're off the diet, right? This also goes along with perfectionism. And then there's a lot of us that have sensory challenges as well, like sensitivity to certain textures, tastes, and smells, etc. And then the last one is an unhealthy relationship with food, which sort of ties into everything that I just said, but then along with that is how diet culture affects us. So what is an unhealthy relationship with food? These are eating behaviors that contribute to poor mental, physical, or emotional health and well-being. So the focus is really on the rules and the negative thoughts that you're having rather than nourishment and pleasure. And this is, sort of thinking of weight over well-being versus what I'm going to teach you today, which is well-being over weight. It tend to be influenced by diet culture. It's $1 trillion industry. If you think about the amount of supplements and weight loss drugs and, all of the advice out there, it's worth so much money. It is a business. So we have to be mindful of that when we're making choices. But we can also be influenced by family, society, and also healthcare as well. Severe disordered eating is another thing that we see. And this can sometimes lead to eating disorders, which is a more severe the severe disordered eating, basically, that's affecting your day-to-day life. And this has to be diagnosed by a healthcare provider. With ADHD, the disordered eating disorders that we tend to see the most is binge eating disorder and bulimia. For ADHD-related disordered eating, this can be intentional or unintentional. So intentional is like, yes, you're restricting to lose weight. Unintentional can be you forget to eat. And I'll talk more about that today. So what are some signs that you might have an unhealthy relationship with food? If you're preoccupied with food, so if you're thinking about food all the time, what you're going to eat next, overanalyzing what you ate, feelings of guilt and shame about certain foods, so labeling foods as good or bad, using food to self-soothe without other tools. So this could be a source of numbing, avoidance, procrastination. I like to call it procrastinating with my clients, distraction, comfort. And then it could be that you can't keep certain foods in the house. I hear this a lot. You can't keep sugar in the house because you feel out of control around it, or you feel like you're going to binge on it. This is sort of the forbidden fruit, right? It's like what you can't have or you feel like you shouldn't have, you tend to want more of. Binge eating, loss of control eating, we see often. So this is eating large amounts of food in a short period of time. There's usually a loss of control followed by guilt and shame, and it may or may not be followed by purging. There's also a lot of strict rules around what, when, and how much to eat. So there could be focus on counting calories, macros, low carb, keto, paleo, etc. And sometimes it's not that you're actively dieting. It could be maybe food rules that are sort of lingering from previous diets that you might have been on. Pacifying hunger or skipping meals. This I see a lot with stimulants, and sometimes this is unintentional, right? If your meds decrease your appetite. Avoiding eating with others. It could be that you don't want to be judged or there's no safe choices. Negative thoughts about body or body dysmorphia. We see that we tend to worship thinness in our society. And so there's this idea that a smaller body equals a better body, and that's just not true. We're more likely to engage in restrictive behavior. So all of these signs that I just talked about are very normalized in society. So we might not realize that we are eating in a disordered way. So I think it's really important to notice this. And what I want to point out here is that there's this binge restrict cycle that we tend to get stuck in. So there's typically this desire to be thin or to get some sort of result. It could be that maybe you want to improve ADHD symptoms, for example. Then there's the dieting and restricting that leads to the cravings and reduced self-control. Then there's a loss of control or overeating, the regain of lost weight or old habits return, and then the cycle continues. So when we look at the ADHD binge restrict pendulum, I like to call it, I'm gonna show you some examples of what this could look like. So the further we swing on one side, think of it like a rubber band. The further back you pull that rubber band, the further it's going to swing in the opposite direction. So the more we restrict, the more we're more likely to overeat. And this could be intentional, like food rules, etc., skipping meals to make up for binging the night before. Or the unintentional examples is I forgot to eat. I have no appetite. I forgot to go food shopping. I've got no energy to cook. I don't know what to eat, right? So this sort of overwhelm that we see, that typically tends to lead to this loss of control. So maybe you're depleted. Maybe you haven't eaten all day and you just feel ravenous and you have that primal hunger that kicks in, and that creates this situation where you're overeating. Or maybe you feel out of control because you have some quote unquote bad foods in the house. Or maybe you're stressed and you're not getting your physical and your mental needs met. Or it could be that you're avoiding emotions, right? And then we typically see that shame spiral. I messed up. I feel terrible. I might as well eat everything in the house and I start over again tomorrow. What we want to get to is this guilt-free zone in the middle. This is where we're eating adequately and you're eating what you want for the most part. So there's that for the most part thinking versus black and white thinking. And why is restriction so harmful for our health? This is based on lots of studies, and it's sort of, shown here on two slides. But we could talk about this for, an entire presentation. But I just put the most important things on the slides here. Excuse me. So it decreases metabolism over time. So the more we diet, the more we, restrict, the more we're going to see decreases in metabolism. Our satiety hormone decreases, so the hormone that tells us that we're full. Lean muscle mass can also be lost, especially if you are losing weight pretty quickly. And we do see that with the GLP-1s that are on the market today. Those weight loss injections that cause you to lose weight very quickly. There's a lot of lean muscle mass loss. The more lean muscle tissue that we lose, that tends to lower our metabolism over time as well. So that can have an effect on it. You decrease, the satisfaction with food decreases. We decrease trust in our body. We decrease that interoceptive awareness even more, right? So the ability to feel our hunger and fullness cues is decreased. The amount of food that you can eat without weight gain once you stop the diet actually decreases as well. Tolerance to stress, feeling in control around food, focus, energy, and executive functioning, and then blood sugar balance tends to be off as well. So these are some things that it increases. Our fat stores increase. Our obsession or preoccupation with foods can increase, and so can our risk for eating disorders, which we know people with ADHD are at a higher risk of all types of eating disorders, especially the binge eating disorder. Neuropeptide Y is something that increases carbohydrate cravings. That's increased as well. Ghrelin, or I like to call it gremlin, the gremlin hormone, increases our hunger as well. It makes you hungrier. If you think about it, if you're in a period of famine, your body wants you to eat more, right? So it doesn't know that you're trying to restrict to lose weight or you're trying to restrict for a specific reason. It just thinks that it's not getting enough. And so your body's going to do everything that it can biologically to keep you safe and alive. The reward value of food increases when you're not getting enough. Your body says, hey, you're not eating enough. Let's make the reward even bigger when you do get this food. And so I see that a lot with people who are dieting. They're like, oh, this sugar just tastes so great right now. I need more of it. I need more of it. Overeating and binging afterwards, from what I said before, weight gain, abdominal fat, heart disease risk, the start of yo-yo dieting, weight cycling can increase inflammation, premature death, and heart disease. And it also increases irritability and affects our mood, right? So if you're not eating enough, I know I am definitely one of those people that gets hangry and everyone lets me know, you haven't had enough to eat, Nicole. That's one of the things that I see the most. So here are some of the effects of dieting restricting on weight specifically. And I talk about weight because it's one of the things that always comes up when we talk about nutrition. But we know that studies show diets don't work long-term for most people. There was a study done in 2007, and there's been lots of studies, but this is the one I'm going to cite specifically. It analyzed 31 long-term studies following people on various diets from 2 to 5 years. 1/3 to 2/3 of people on those diets regained more weight than they lost. And one of the biggest predictors of weight gain over the 4 years was having lost weight on a diet at some point during the years before they started. So what does this tell us? It tells us that diets don't work and that it is not a good indicator of health, because we know that the pursuit of weight loss is often not very healthy for a lot of people, and it's very short-lived. So we need some strategies to be able to be healthy longer term without so much focus on the weight, because that's really what makes us feel out of control a lot of the time. So how do we improve our relationship with food? Through intuitive eating. Intuitive eating, or IE, I'm going to have it abbreviated on the slides, is a self-care eating framework which integrates instincts, emotions, and rational thought. It was created back in 1995 by 2 dietitians. It's not a new thing. It's not a diet or a quick fix. Despite what you might be seeing on social media, it's not a new trend or anything like that, even though it's become more popular as of late. But it's really going to help you to tune into your body and respond to those needs to get your needs met. It is an all foods fit approach, and it is weight neutral. So we focus on non-weight related goals and behaviors that affect health. It is based on 10 evidence-based principles. It has a validated assessment scale, and there are hundreds of studies showing positive results. So what are some of the benefits? We know that there is that improved interoceptive awareness and responsiveness. You're better able to listen to your body. And we know with ADHD, we have a hard time listening to our body and figuring out what we need. We have a hard time just responding to those cues. We know that there's reduced impulsivity and binging. We're able to cope with emotional dysregulation without using food. There's increase in body acceptance. It simplifies eating because we're not using all those food rules, so we have less decision fatigue. There's fewer anxiety and depressive symptoms. And then studies have also shown that there's improved blood sugar management, cholesterol levels, self-esteem, blood pressure. Lots of great benefits of intuitive eating. So what are the principles? I'm going to list them. There's 10 of them. I'm going to go through each of them one by one. Very briefly, I could do a session on each of these principles individually, an hour long. Each of them, I'm just covering some of the most important points, and I've tailored them for ADHD to make sure that you understand how they work. So first thing is to reject the diet mentality. If we're stuck in the diet mentality where we're constantly worried about dieting and, what diet am I going to be on next? How can I restrict? Then we're never going to be able to tune into our body, because we're always going to be listening to those external voices to guide us. So we need to recognize that diets don't work and they lead to feelings of failure, even though it's not your fault. Like we said, diets don't work, and it creates this cycle that you're stuck in. So if you're listening to this and you're like, this is me, diets have never been able to work for me, I'm stuck. I want you to know that you're not alone. This is something that so many of us struggle with. And there is another way. Number 2 is to honor your hunger. We need to practice tuning in. We need to improve our hunger cues. So recognize the early signs of hunger so that you're not waiting too long to eat. And if you find it really difficult to listen to your hunger, or you're just distracted or hyper-focused like most of us are with ADHD, then sometimes it's okay to eat on a schedule in the beginning, so that you are just getting your body into a routine. And it's what we call, it's really eating for self-care. Right? So you're keeping your body adequately fed. It's going to prevent that primal drive to eat later that causes overeating and binging. Making peace with food is number 3. So we need to stop restricting, right? So giving yourself that unconditional permission to eat the foods that you've labeled as good or bad is going to help you break out of that cycle. And this doesn't mean to go and eat every food, that's available all the time without any care in the world about how it makes you feel. That's not what it's about. You still want to make sure that you're listening to your body. And if something doesn't make you feel well, or it goes against, a recommendation from a doctor, or something that, you're allergic to, things that generally make you feel unwell, then yes, we still want you to respect your body and limit those things. But oftentimes we're over restricting on things that we don't really need to be restrictive of. So it's really helpful to figure out what that is. So here's the paradox. When you give yourself permission to eat all foods without guilt, their power over you tends to diminish over time. And I know that it might sound impossible to a lot of people, but it does work. I've seen it so many times with my clients, and this is why intuitive eating has become so popular, because it really does work. Number 4 is challenging the food police. So you want to notice the critical thoughts about eating more as an external diet voice rather than the truth. So noticing, okay, this is just my diet brain telling me to do something, but what do I really need right now? So replacing those black and white food rules with curiosity. What's actually working for my body and my brain? Number 5 is discovering the satisfaction factor. We seek stimulation, right? So we need to make sure that our foods are satisfying. And this doesn't have to mean every time, right? It's not all or nothing. But if we're eating foods that are, quote unquote, diet foods, or things that don't really taste good to us, then we're going to be more likely to find something else afterwards that we want to eat anyway, right? So it's, you try all day to be quote unquote good, and you're eating, let's say, for example, salads and things that are, more nutrient dense, which is totally fine, absolutely okay. But then at the end of the day, you feel like really like you've been restricting so much and you just have to give in, right? So it's more of a balanced way to eat, where you can have those foods that you really enjoy, and you can also have the foods that are more nutrient dense, right? There can be both. They can both exist together. Feel your fullness. So ADHD makes it easy to miss fullness signals, right? So we have to create simple check-in strategies to practice pausing during meals and assess our comfort levels and fullness. And this does take practice, but it can be done. Coping with your emotions with kindness is number 7. So food is often used to regulate emotions. That is a normal part of being a human. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing you're doing wrong. But there can be some other effective ways to cope with your emotions. So sometimes eating, it's an easy way and it's convenient, but it might not be what you need in the moment. So it's important to build a toolkit of non-coping strategies. And there's something called the Dopamine menu, which I know a lot of you might not have heard of, but this is a sort of a menu of things that increase dopamine in your life that make you feel good. And this is not meant to stop you from eating when you're hungry. It's meant to give you something to do instead of eating when you know that that's not really what you need and what's not going to help you in the moment. Number 8 is respecting your body. accept your genetic blueprint rather than fighting for an unrealistic ideal. Genetics has a lot to do with the size of our bodies, and that doesn't mean that they can't be changed or that it's not affected by what we eat and exercise, but it does have a lot to do with the size of our bodies for a lot of people. So focusing on how your body feels and it functions rather than how it looks. So putting weight on the back burner, putting your looks on the back burner and thinking, okay, how do I want to feel in my body right now can really help to break that cycle. And then number 9 is movement, feeling the difference. So shifting from exercise as punishment or just thinking of exercise as a calorie burning activity to something that's more energizing, right? So adding in the novelty and the fun. And then lastly is, how do you honor your health with gentle nutrition? How do we make food choices that honor both health and taste preferences without rigid rules, right? So I like to think of it as nutrition by addition. So starting with what you want to eat, and then you can add those nutrients in before you start taking things out. And I'll talk about how to do that a little bit later. It is okay to avoid the foods that you need to for allergies, sensitivities, etc. Diabetes, heart disease, if you need to limit salt, it's still okay to have a special, restrictions in some cases if you need to for your health. But for the most part, if you are just eating what feels good in your body, then it's going to be helpful for you mentally and physically. So it's consistency that matters more than occasional choices. And mindset. So I know a lot of people listening to this is, just like myself as a dietitian, when I first get diagnosed and everyone else who I've worked with, usually we jump right to, okay, what do I eat? How do I optimize my health? How do I optimize my brain to make my ADHD symptoms improve, for example? But if we're trying to optimize without getting to the mindset work first and actually making peace with food and feeling comfortable in your body and listening to your hunger cues and your fullness cues, we can get the best plan in the world, but it's not going to work. So we really need to work on this mindset stuff first. How to nourish your brain and your body without restriction. First, giving yourself permission to eat all foods without guilt. So I'm going to give you an example of what the scarcity versus abundance mindset is. Scarcity mindset is, I don't know when I'll get to have this food again. Like, let's say if you're on a diet. So I'm going to eat as much as I can, and then my diet starts again tomorrow. That's what we call last supper eating. It's like the last time you're ever going to get to have this food again. So you just eat it all, and then you feel out of control. This also goes along with labeling foods as good or bad. Abundance is, I don't need to binge on this food because I know I can have it anytime I want. I'm reducing that scarcity. I've sort of what we call habituation. So I've habituated it. I've made it a normal part of my life. So I don't feel like I can't ever have it again. And so it's not as exciting anymore because I know I can have it and I feel in control when I have it, and I don't have trigger foods anymore. Now, this is the ultimate goal. Obviously, everyone's journey is going to be different, and sometimes it takes weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years. It just depends on the person, but you can definitely get to that point. And this is, for the most part, thinking versus black and white. What is gentle nutrition? So this was the 10th principle, and typically we wait until the end to get to this point because, again, we need to work on the mindset stuff before we start adding in food rules. But I know a lot of you are going to ask me, what should I be eating with ADHD? So it's okay to follow some guidelines, but not rules. So that means still follow what you enjoy eating and what tastes good to you, but it's okay to still have some guidelines. And I know we need those guidelines with ADHD in order to kind of keep us on track. So adequate nutrition, I can't tell you enough, is so important for our health. Protein, carbohydrates, and fat. So instead of thinking of them as just macros and, I'm counting carbs or I'm counting calories, think of it as these are going to help me build neurotransmitters. These are going to help me think better or make me feel good, right? So these help to build dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, all the things that affect our brain. It's needed for hormones, absorption of nutrients, and healthy gut bacteria. Up to 95% of serotonin, that feel-good neurotransmitter, is made in the gut from food, bugs, and enzymes. So we need a variety of foods. And then carbohydrates is a big one that people like to restrict. Low carb or keto diets. It is the body and the brain's preferred source of energy. Our bodies will use carbohydrates first, and you can find these in grains, fruits, veggies, nuts, seeds, beans, and lentils. And I'll talk a little bit more about how to make these choices after. But I do want to mention that vitamins and minerals are important as well, and these are found in our foods. We can supplement with them. Absolutely. I don't recommend going and supplementing without checking with the doctor first, because there can be some drug nutrient interactions or things that are going to affect your ADHD meds, for example. But the ones that we see the most for brain function are omega-3s, iron, zinc, magnesium, B vitamins, and choline. And these can all be found in different foods. Now, if you're somebody who's thinking, well, I don't really eat that well, maybe you only eat a couple times a day or once a day, or you just don't have a big appetite, you can supplement, but I want you to maximize the foods that you are eating so that you can get these types of foods in. So things like fatty fish, nuts and seeds, like walnuts, ground flax seeds, chia seeds, these are all great for all of those vitamins and minerals that I mentioned before. Whole eggs are also a good option as well. So these are just, a few of the foods that, if you can only eat a certain amount, these would be a good batch to eat. Can diets reduce ADHD symptoms? This is a question I get a lot. There is no strong evidence to suggest that any single diet reduces ADHD symptoms. Things like keto, vegan, paleo, intermittent fasting. I hear questions about these all the time. They are still diets. They still are going to push you further away from feeling those hunger cues and fullness cues. We do need more research on humans before we can decide whether or not these are helpful. So a lot of the information that we hear out there is anecdotal, meaning that somebody might have said that it works for them, but we don't know if it works for a large population of people. So there's really not a reason to go and start one of these diets. If it works for you, then that's great. If it's something that you can follow and it makes you feel good, but do keep in mind that a lot of these diets are restrictive. And so if you're finding yourself stuck in that binge restrict cycle, it could be because you're being overly restrictive and that you need to make peace with food. So elimination diets is another big one that I see, especially with ADHD and the autistic community. It's because of sensitivities and intolerances. And yes, there is a population of people that do have sensitivities to gluten, dairy, soy, additives, things like that. And if you do notice an obvious reaction, then yes, I would say, reduce those. We want to be respecting our bodies and making ourselves feel good in that way. But I wouldn't go and cut them out just because someone told you to. There have been associations between red dye and hyperactivity in children, not adults. But again, this is individualized. It can be hard to sustain. It can be really impractical, and it can trigger eating disorders. I'd say eating with ADHD is difficult enough. We don't want to be adding more and more food rules. It's just going to affect our decision-making and analysis paralysis and all those things that we get stuck on. So it's really more important to simplify eating. And the one diet that I do recommend to use as a guideline, not a rule, is the Mediterranean diet. This is not ADHD specific. There's not any research really that's strong enough to say, hey, this works specifically for ADHD. But we do know that there are multiple studies that show benefits for cognitive function and for overall health time and time again. So it's okay to use the Mediterranean diet as a general guideline, but not a rule, right? And it's important to combine this with fun foods for satisfaction. And the Mediterranean diet actually includes a lot of those foods that I talked about on this previous slide, which is whole grains, fruits, veggies, nuts, seeds, beans, lentils, fatty fish, whole eggs, olive oil, things like that. So it's all the same. Most of the time we can get what we need from our foods. Okay, so here are some steps for balanced meals and snacks without restriction. So ask yourself, Is this a complete meal that I'm about to have right now? Does it have carbs, proteins, and healthy fats? If not, how can I add some nutrients without removing satisfaction? You can think fiber, protein, fat, color. So fiber is really great because it's going to help to keep you full, and it's going to help you stay regular as well, digestively. So what can you add to make you feel full for a few hours? Like, is this going to keep me full? If that's what you want. If you're just having a snack because you want it to taste good, then we might not really care as much about if it's going to make us feel full. But if you want it to keep you full, like if you know that you're not going to have another opportunity to eat for a few hours, or you have to exercise or something like that, make sure that you're including things like protein and fat, or maybe you need to eat a little bit more. What can you add to make it more satisfying? So we need textures and flavors, and the temperature has to be right. For a lot of us with ADHD, the satisfaction of our food is really important. And sometimes we like to eat the same foods over and over and over again. Other times we don't want to even look at the same food twice in one day. It just depends on the person. So that's really individualized, but think about what types of things you enjoy. Is there something that you've been really restrictive of while on a diet that actually makes eating much more enjoyable for you, and would make eating easier, and the process of eating more satisfying for you? Here are some tips. Combine nutrient-dense foods with fun foods, right? So adding nutrients before you subtract. And then it's okay to combine convenience foods with fresh foods. So obviously fresh foods are going to have lots of nutrients and, antioxidants and things like that to keep you healthy. But there's nothing wrong with convenience foods. And for the most part, a lot of us with ADHD need convenience foods to make sure that we're just eating enough throughout the day. So pre-cooked, pre-chopped, frozen, canned, whatever it is that you need to do to make sure that you're getting enough food in to prevent yourself from becoming too ravenous, or to make it easier for yourself. These foods can definitely be healthy and they still add nutrients. So if it's okay to have these options, and I have this start asterisk here on the bottom, is choose options that match various levels of energy. So what I mean by that is, if you are expecting yourself to cook 5 meals, every week, or excuse me, a meal every day of the week for 5 days straight, but you know that every day when you get home from work, you're exhausted and you have no spoons left, there's no mental energy, then that's not realistic. It's not going to happen for you. So have mostly easy options, and then some options that you have to cook maybe from scratch on the days where you do feel like you have the energy. Or maybe you need all pre-cooked options for you, and then you can add some fresh things to it. So keep it realistic for you. Here are some ways to increase interoceptive awareness, right? So remember, that's the ability to perceive and identify, understand those internal signals. It is critical to do this so that you can understand what your body needs and to get your needs met. So some guidelines. You can set a timer or reminder. I know sometimes those don't work for us. It could be a visual cue that you use, whatever it is that's going to remind you to eat. It could be a note on the refrigerator. It could be just anything visual that works for you. Every 3 to 4 hours, we should really be eating. It can be more frequently, but I wouldn't really go longer than 4 hours, because that's typically when that urge to overeat or that primal hunger kicks in and we tend to feel loss of control. So when you're checking, I want you to ask these questions. Am I hungry? If yes, then eat. If no, decide if you need to eat something. When was the last time I ate? Has it been more than 4 to 5 hours? If yes, then it's probably time for a meal or a snack. Do I have a plan for my next meal if I'm not hungry? Am I thirsty? Have I had any water today? Sometimes we completely forget. What am I feeling right now? Am I feeling happy? Am I restless? Am I sad? Am I angry? Will eating make me feel better? Is that what I need right now? Have acceptance and self-compassion throughout this process. We tend to be really hard on ourselves, and just know that it does take time to make peace with food and to shift your mindset. And accept that your ADHD brain is not going to be consistent. By nature, we're not really consistent people because we like change, and that's not a bad thing, but we have to also accept it, and we need to be able to be flexible. So our mental capacity fluctuates throughout the day, sometimes the hour, the minute. So cooking 3 meals some days and not on other days is going to happen, right? So we need those backup options. So always having pre-cooked frozen meals, maybe some takeout options, delivery service, or maybe having, some canned things in the cupboard that you can take as a easy go-to option. A backup plan. So let's say you are so good, I packed my lunch, and then you forget it at home or you leave it in the car. This happens to us, right? So we need backup plans. Maybe leave some food at work. Just because you can cook a fancy meal and you have the capability of it doesn't mean that you have to in that moment. If you are mentally fried, don't force yourself to do it because it's going to hinder the process. Have something that's a little bit easier for you. The basics are okay as long as they're satisfying and they make you feel good. We don't need to be doing, the detoxes and, the all organic and those types of things that a lot of times they have less effect on our health than eating regularly on a consistent basis, as consistent as we can be. And so before restricting, consider your mental health and your overall intake. Do diets make you feel out of control? Do they make you binge? Is it helping me or is this harming me? So over time, you can feel in control of your food choices and you can have more trust in your body. So I want you to know that if you're struggling. Where do we start? These are some tips on how to get started. Number 1, assess your current relationship with food. Do you feel like you're out of control? Do you feel like you need some help, right? So consider intuitive eating as an option. Prioritize eating regular balanced meals about every 3 hours. That's usually where most of us need to start. It's not with the optimizing. It's not with eating the perfect, diet. I just need to make sure that I'm eating something every few hours. Drop the food rules and give yourself permission to eat without guilt. It might feel a little bit nerve-wracking in the beginning to allow yourself to do that, but over time, the foods do become normalized and you will feel more at peace and you'll be able to go about your day without having those intense cravings. Tune in with your body and respond to your needs to build trust. So that's the checking in part, right? So doing the body scans, checking in, what do I need? Prioritizing yourself. Self-compassion is important. It is okay to ask for help. And if you need some individualized coaching for faster results and accountability, that's okay. I do offer that as well. So lastly, I just want to show you that if you do need some support, I offer all the different ways for learning. So if you like one-on-one coaching or you prefer group coaching, I have those options. You can book a discovery call. And there's a free video as well with some more information that I'm talking about today on my website, eatingwithadhd.com. I also am on Instagram at eatingwithadhd. And then if you prefer to do something more like an online course or a community, I have that as well. With video modules and downloadable slides. I give you some easy meal and snack guides. There's a workbook. There's a private community where I do support meetings. So all the things that you guys need to feel supported and get your questions answered, I'm happy to provide those for you. So again, if you wanted to go to my website or get on my mailing list, then you get lots of information from me. So thank you so much for listening. I hope that was helpful for you, and I'm happy to answer some of your questions now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nicole. Before we start our Q&A, I will quickly thank Inflow once more for sponsoring today's webinar. And I would also like to share some of the results from today's poll question and they will help to steer our questions in the Q&A. We asked, which of the following challenges related to eating and nutrition cause you the most stress and frustration? The number one answer was impulsive, emotional, or binge eating. So we will dig into that a little bit. And that was about 21% of people. So that was their top challenge. That was followed by meal prep overwhelm, and managing cravings was number 3. And number 4 was using food for stimulation at about 12%. And the other answers were pretty tied. So I think I'm going to really focus on these areas. And I'd like to start with that impulsive, emotional binge eating challenge. As we know, the consumer packaged good industry, billions of dollars are spent every year to make food addictive. Does this in any way change our approach toward our eating habits? In other words, should we eliminate foods that we know are going to cause an addiction, sugary things? We had someone write in and say, like, they just cannot have Cheetos in their house. If they have them, they will eat them all within 2 days.
Yeah.
Should we factor that in when we're thinking about how to approach our eating?
Well, it's individualized, but I will say, I mean, these foods that are highly palatable, right? It's typically high sugar or high salt or, high in fat. Those things, they are really palatable. Number one, I will say that usually these foods are going to be much more exciting and, we'll be much more impulsive around them if we haven't eaten adequately. So number one, I want to make sure that, if you're finding that you can't keep it in the house, have you eaten? Because sometimes our brains biologically push us towards eating more foods. And if there's something in the house that you are going to think of, because you know that you have Cheetos in the house, for example, you know that they're there, you're going to be more likely to go, gravitate towards that food that you're really excited about. And you'll be less likely to stop eating that food if you haven't eaten enough. Now, I know Cheetos are not filling. It's not the most filling food. You could probably eat a full meal and then have a full bag of Cheetos as well. But like I said before, it sometimes comes down to the making peace with food part. So these foods feel more quote unquote addictive when we haven't made peace with them. Like if you feel really bad for eating those Cheetos, or, you usually can't have sugar in the house, it could be because it's so exciting when you do get to have it, or there's a lot of guilt and shame tied to it, right? There's an emotional charge with it. So it makes the reward value of that food even larger. Now, when it comes to the addictive piece, there's been a lot of studies that show, yes, these highly palatable foods do create more of a reward in our ADHD brains, or reward center, excuse me, I can't speak. And so it can create that feeling of like, yes, you're getting more dopamine from it. And so you want more and more and more. But that doesn't mean that we just have to accept that and let it be that way. I think also it's really important to know that the studies that claim that food is addictive actually have showed the opposite. So if you look at all the studies in mice, for example, when they said that they were addicted to sugar, the biggest indicator of them having those addictive behaviors, when they would continuously go back to the sugar and consume it in large amounts and like have these binge eating tendencies, it was because they had less access to it. They were restricted to it. And in order for the mice to actually take part in the study, they were restricted first. So they were hungry. They didn't give them regular access. It was new and exciting. It was like, oh, they don't know when they're going to get to have it again. So they consumed all of it. So I will say, in terms of the palatability, if you have made peace with food or you're like, no, that's not really what it is, it's okay to, maybe limit it once in a while. But the more you restrict and the more you keep it out of your house, the more exciting it is going to be to you. So if it takes some time, I would say maybe to go through that with a coach if you're worried about it. I've helped lots of people kind of get over their fear of addictions with certain foods by going through this process. It is individualized, though. I hope that answers your question.
That was so fascinating. No, thank you for going into that detail. That was really helpful. And it leads to another common question that we got today. And that is exactly as you were saying, like, to fill yourself with other foods, so that also you are not sort of binging on the Cheetos, or as someone said, the Girl Scout cookies. A lot of people here today say they just don't feel hungry during the day. They get hyper-focused and they forget to eat. Or this is very common with the parents here today, that their children insist they are not hungry all day long. And then you know what happens with that at the end of the day. Can you recommend, would it be a good idea to set a schedule, at least at the outset, to get yourself in the habit of checking in and even, I want to say forcing yourself, but making, questioning yourself. Maybe I should be hungry. I haven't eaten and it's 2:00 in the afternoon. What can we do to kind of challenge that when our instincts are telling us we're not hungry, but we really should be?
Yes, absolutely. And I want to say I am here with you. I have a 3-year-old who just asked me for ice cream for breakfast this morning. So I understand. It's because it is what it is. It's the interoceptive piece that I was talking about. So we lack that ability to sort of feel what's happening in our body. That includes emotional regulation. It includes things like, just feeling what's happening. What do you need? How do you need to get your needs met? So the hyperfocus, the stress sometimes that is triggered when we're in those moments, that can sort of decrease it even more. It sort of shuts off the ability to feel that. And so, yes, I think eating on a schedule can be helpful. And so that's where, we say with intuitive eating, it's based on your hunger cues and your fullness cues. But if you are somebody who doesn't feel those, especially, whether you have ADHD or you have a history of eating disorders and your body sort of goes offline, yes, it is important to eat on a regular schedule. And that's to actually bring those hunger cues back online to let your body know, yes, you have regular access to food. And you'll start to notice that you might start to feel some of your hunger cues again. So with the kiddos, especially, it's important to just offer regularly and continuing to offer and give a variety of foods. They need to just see that it's available and that they have regular meals on a regular schedule. And I know it's tough when they don't eat it and it goes to waste. But all we can do is really continue to offer. And one of the things that I do with my daughter and some of my clients is just to say, hey, that sugar craving that you're having right now, that ice cream that you're really craving, that's because you haven't eaten all night. And your brain is telling you that you need something quick. You need quick energy. So ice cream sounds really good right now because your body needs some energy. And so even though ice cream is what you want in the moment, that might not make you feel very good. It might not give you the long-lasting energy that you need. How about we have something else? I will say maybe ice cream's not on the menu, but how about we have something else that's, a little bit sweet that you really enjoy, and we'll pair it with something that's going to give you long-lasting energy too. So, removing the language of good versus bad is really helpful, because we don't want kids to grow up thinking that there are good versus bad foods, because then when they eat those foods, they associate them with being good or bad. Same thing that we do as adults. And so that's where the guilt and the shame comes in, that spiral kicks in. So removing the guilt and the shame from the language, continuously offering. You can absolutely eat on a schedule if that's what you need. Some people really have a hard time with that interoception. Even myself, as somebody who's an intuitive eating counselor, I'm a dietitian, and I I do this stuff every day. If I'm doing a project where I'm, hyper focused for hours, I still need to set an alarm. Like that's just the nature of our bodies sometimes, right? So you can be really good at it, but we still need to remember like, oh yeah, I've been so focused on getting this done that I've forgotten my needs. So getting those needs met is so important. And yes, absolutely scheduling, you can do that.
Okay, so helpful. On the flip side of that same coin, you had talked about practicing sort of checking in with yourself during meal times on your fullness cues. And people are wondering, what does that actually look like? How do we do this in the midst of a meal to make sure that we are stopping at an appropriate time?
Yeah. So it takes some time or a little bit more dedication in the beginning if you really want to do that, because we do need to be stopping and being more intentional about it. So that could mean at the beginning of the meal, just sort of checking in and saying, okay, what's my hunger level right now? Am I just a little bit hungry? Am I really hungry? Or maybe you just don't know. You're sort of neutral. But once you start eating, you can start to pay attention to the taste and the textures and the smells of the food and sort of try to immerse yourself in it a little bit, just to make sure that your focus is actually staying on the food rather than everything around you. So to be more intentional with it, almost like a grounding exercise for the experience of eating. And then towards the middle of the meal, let's say however much you have on your plate, you can say, okay, how am I feeling now? Am I starting to feel full? Are thoughts of food starting to decrease a little bit? Is my stomach starting to feel a little bit more full? Am I starting to feel a little bit more calm? Do I feel energized? How do I feel in my body right now? And this is going to feel different based on, the day, the type of food that you're eating, your exercise levels, all of that. And then again, towards the end, once your plate is almost finished, or that doesn't have to be it. It could be maybe you have, you're halfway through and that's when you feel done. It really depends on every person and every meal. But those steps that I gave you on this previous slide, which is checking in with your body. And those steps is, how do I feel right now? Yes, exactly. So maybe setting a timer. It could be, I'm going to check in and see what this feels like. It might feel really odd in the beginning to do that. But just notice, because sometimes we're doing 10 things at once. We're scrolling on our phones. We're listening to our kids scream. We're doing, 10 things at a time. And then before you know it, realize we finished our plate and we didn't even really feel satisfied, or we didn't recognize it, or we're really full. So slowing down, doing some deep breaths can be really helpful as well.
Okay, great. Now, I did want to ask about dopamine. You talked about having a dopamine menu of activities that could stimulate you, because a lot of people did say that they're using food for stimulation when work is boring, or like yesterday rained all day long, right? And your energy is just down. Is there like a menu of healthy, like not sugar-based foods that can help to stimulate our dopamine, like go-tos when we know that we're using food for this purpose, but we feel driven?
Yes. Yeah. And so again, you can include some of the fun foods. I would say combine it with some of the other foods. So like I mentioned before, with the crunchy, salty, bubbly, things that kind of satisfy that chewing that we like to have, that sort of is what increases the satisfaction. So if you like crunchy things, if you like salty things, if you want to chew on something, you can use like jewelry, it's called. It's like chew toys even. Things like, carrots, or it could be really crunchy crackers. It could be, sugar-free gum. It could be, anything that really increases your satisfaction, that you enjoy the taste of. And you can have that along with the sort of fun foods, maybe something sugary along with it, so that because if you think I can't have this food, I'm not supposed to have sugar, it might create that restriction around it. And so I want you to think, maybe I can have a little bit of this, but I know I have to pair it with something else so that I can feel full and not continue to eat it for a longer period of time. And it does take some practice, but absolutely can be done.
Okay, that's a great reminder. Yeah, the pairing, and not the restricting, which is not helpful. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. This was so helpful, Nicole. Thank you so much for sharing your advice and insight and your strategies with our ADHD community today. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you also to today's listeners. If you would like to access the event resources, you can visit ADDitudeMag.com and search for podcast 549. The slides and recording are posted a few hours after each live webinar. And if you are listening in replay mode, simply click on the episode description. Our full library of ADDitude webinars is available as a podcast. It's called the ADHD Experts podcast, and it's available on most streaming platforms. We hope we will see you again this Friday for a free Q&A session with Dr. Sharon Saline, who will answer your questions in real time on all things ADHD. Make sure you don't miss any future ADDitude webinars, articles, or research updates by signing up to receive our free email newsletters at ADDitudeMag.com/newsletters. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.